Oh, kia ora tātou katoa. It's wonderful to be back here again for 2020. On behalf of the whānau from Community Research Aotearoa, we'd love to welcome each of you to this amazing webinar on co-design for wellbeing. Aroha mai. Firstly, we'd like to acknowledge each of you that have taken time out of your days to join us, especially the community groups and NGOs from throughout Aotearoa, and those of you from government agencies who are looking for insight to inform your work. Throughout this webinar, we will invite you to join our Community Research Facebook page to post any questions for our presenters who answer your pātai today and also over the next couple of days. If you want to be notified when we're broadcasting our next webinar, do join the Facebook page because this will help you stay connected to the kōrero, to the discussions that emerge for all of us. So it's a fantastic opportunity for us to come together and learn from the expertise of Penny Hagen and also yourself, I te tuahine no Ngāti Porou. We're really looking forward to learning about the more practical applications of co-design, and already some of the questions that have emerged are really looking at co-design from a mātauranga Māori perspective, which I'm certain you're going to highlight us on as well. Also, e hoa mā, don't be quick to leave after the call. It'll be really important to have you on board because we would love to share with you who our next speaker is as well. Dr. Juan Todi, who is known as the Māori criminologist as well. So we've got 186 whānau joining us today, but one of the things that I did say to our special guests is that this is a kōrero. It's just like us having a cup of tea together and hanging out with one another, so it's really, really wonderful for us all to be here to listen to your story. Just checking in to make sure, ladies, are you nice and comfortable as well? Yep.
Kia ora.
Ka pai. Excellent. Everything's all running nicely and smoothly. Now, we just got a little bit of a delay. All right, here we go. So we are aware that there's a lot of poor examples of co-design. And there are also some fantastic examples, and I do firmly believe that Aotearoa are actually global leaders in this space. And for those of you that are really here to learn, today is really an opportunity to pick up some really hot tips that we hope that you'll be able to just apply to your mahi, or at least open your thinking, especially your organisations, and how you might go about approaching engagements or interactions with communities and whānau. It is a bit of a buzzword, and many government agencies and lots of organisations are kind of throwing this co-design concept around, but it also has the co-design roots in the D School of Stanford, which I'm certain the ladies are going to speak about today, and specifically a focus on user-centered product design. And of course, co-design has shown itself in technology in many different projects. And also, as we'll find out today, many Māori are very familiar with this concept of co-design as well. So we've just got to be mindful about some of the jargon that might seem confusing, but actually it's quite commonsensical. And I spoke earlier about examples of really poor co-design. Some of the best and most authentic examples of co-design can be found in South Auckland and other parts of Aotearoa, especially in the work of the Southern Initiative with the Auckland Co-Design Lab, who are striving to create opportunities, address inequity, enable whānau transformation, and shift power through co-design. In this webinar, our two whānau here, Angie Tangaere from the Southern Initiative and Dr. Penny Hagen from the Auckland Co-Design Lab, will provide some wonderful examples of effective co-design. Your approach brings together mātauranga Māori, Western science and lived experience of whānau to support systems change in spaces, services and support that enable tamariki to thrive. At the heart of their work is empowering whānau through an intentional tikanga and neuroscience approach and process. This means that whānau lead the co-design process. They develop the insights and prototypes in response to the real-life issues that they identify as important. The approach disrupts traditional service-led responses to social challenges and results in new capability, capacity, and alternative whānau-led models driven by the outcomes that matter most to them. Angie, Tangaere and Penny will share their key insights and also their key challenges and I guess, yeah, lived experiences from applying this particular approach over a long period of time. Angie from the Southern Initiative was born in Papakura, kia ora, and raised in South Auckland with a whakapapa to Ngāti Porou on her father's side and also her Pākehā roots from Taranaki from her mother's side. She graduated with a law degree from the University of Auckland, but decided not to become a lawyer. That sounds wise. But using that amazing intellect, Angie was able to work at a community level and took up a role at Te Puni Kōkiri, working with iwi and Māori trusts in South Auckland. She then worked with the Ministry of Social Development in South Auckland, working with communities to develop better services and engagement, especially with whānau. We've got a bit of a theme going on here, which is awesome. She moved on to a role with Māori Health, in particular the NGO, the National Hauora Coalition, before working with TSI, the Southern Initiative. She combines her experience with government agencies, community and whānau to develop whānau-led programs, disrupting ineffective business as usual systems. Now I'll shift across to you, the amazing Penny Hagen. She's the co-design lead with the Auckland Co-Design Lab. Over the last 15 years, Penny has designed and led a range of participatory and social innovation initiatives in Australia and New Zealand, working across community, commercial and academic sectors with a focus on wellbeing. Penny specialises in projects with social outcomes and provides training and mentoring to design teams and organisations wanting to increase their impact through the adoption of more participatory design and research approaches. Her practice is increasingly focused on understanding points of integration between health, design, youth development, evaluation, the built environment and policy in order to increase social outcomes. Penny has a PhD in participatory design and is a presenter and reviewer of academic and industry forums. I think that all of that says to me, you're awesome and that you put people first, and co-design is an approach to actually really put whānau, people, humans at the centre of the mahi. So awesome bios, ladies, but I think it's an awesome opportunity for us to hand the rākau over to you both to share a bit about you, your story, and some of those insights that you've got to share with us. Tēnā kōrua.
O, kia ora tātou. Tuatahi he mihi ki a koea, Kaimari mō tō karakia. Tō mihi tō manaakitanga ki a tātou tēnei ata no reira ngā mihi. Ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou. Ngā hapu, ngā iwi o te motu, ko Angie Tangaere ahau no te tai rāwhiti. No reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora whānau, my name's Angie. That was a long bio, so you know a lot about me. I don't really need to say much here, but I'm born and bred South Auckland, Ngāti Porou, mama of 2 boys, and I'm really excited to share what we're learning in this space, and our focus has been on supporting tamariki wellbeing and helping to understand how we best support whānau to give tamariki the best start in life. So I'm a social entrepreneur at the Southern Initiative, and we'll talk about our mahi shortly, but I'll hand it over to Dr. Penny Hagen, Director of the Auckland Co-Design Lab, to think more about herself.
Kia ora, Angie, tēnā whakei mari, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Kona te Pākehā te iwi no Tamaki Makaurau hau ko Penny Hagen tako ingoa. Thanks, Kaimari, for that opening and for creating this space for us to connect with other people who have an interest in the mahi, but in the bigger kaupapa of seeing things shift and working with whānau to ensure that what's important to them are the things that we're focused on in our policy and service systems. I'm based at the Auckland Co-Design Lab. My background is in participatory design, which is helping organisations and communities put the people who are impacted by decisions and strategies in the decision-making process, and helping organisations to think about how they go about doing that. The co-design lab itself we're nested inside the Southern Initiative, which is a real privilege actually, to be working alongside people like Angie and other team members here in South Auckland. We're funded by 9 central government agencies, and our role is to try and help build the capability of the public sector really to work differently together, and to try and help make better connections between the wellbeing ambitions that we have, the policy intent, and what actually happens on the ground, and some kind of learning connections between all that. So that's the focus of our mahi. Kia ora.
So do the context setting stuff, a little bit about our mahi. So
Should I put the slides up?
yeah, why don't I put the slides up? So fine, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the context of our mahi, and then we'll talk through, we'll give you some practical examples of what we're learning. But the Southern Initiative is the social innovation unit of Auckland Council. So it's our job to think about how we do things differently for different results for our whānau. So what we know at a population level for our whānau here in South Auckland is that despite a whole heap of resource, lots of initiatives, lots of programs, for some of our whānau things are getting worse. So we know for the status quo is not serving some of our whānau, in fact it's making things worse. So our job is to think about, well, what are the compelling alternatives? What do we need to grow to respond to whānau and support whānau in a different way? So basically it's our job to think about how do we need to work and do things differently for our whānau to have better outcomes in the area. And one of those has been to think about, well, what's the kind of social innovation methodology that needs to sit at the heart of doing things differently. And you'll hear us talk about some key principles around that. And that has a lot of that's been around not just putting whānau at the centre of what we do, but supporting whānau to lead. And fundamentally rethinking where innovation capability and capacity resides when we're thinking about what we need to grow and the alternatives. Yeah, should we go there?
Don't mind us just looking back and forth.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to make the most of the.
So what we've been thinking about is, if we need to do things differently, then how might we work in a different way to do that with our whānau? And so what we've been thinking about is how we triangulate mātauranga Māori design methodology and the neuroscience in our case, because we're focused on better outcomes for our tamariki, first 1,000 days, as well as building the capability of adults to accelerate outcomes for our tamariki. I can see some people are finding it hard to hear, so I'll come close and make sure that you can hear what I'm saying. So I just want to stress that we're just sharing what we're learning in terms of triangulating these systems of knowledge. And the whole point of doing this, and our innovation methodology, if you'd call that, we sometimes call it whānau-centred design, is this triangulation of knowledge allows us to learn in the process. So we're not saying this is it. We just want to share with you what we've learned about the way that we have combine these 3 things and what that's meaning for our work. And so shall I touch on them, the 3 of them? Or? So if I could just talk to the 3 components, and that I'll start with the design methodology. And for us, and Kay Marie talked about human-centered design and corporate design in terms of serving a specific purpose. But when I came to this work, the things that made sense to me about design as a methodology, and you can see the methodology we use, it's the Auckland Co-Design Labs methodology. I saw an opportunity with that methodology to put our whānau at the centre of everything that we're doing, not just their voice, but being strength-based, building capability, sharing the whānau sharing their knowledge with us sharing some knowledge, putting them at the centre of what we're doing, not a system, not a program, not an intervention. That was the first thing, because that makes sense to me in terms of a Māori worldview as well, people at the centre, manaaki tangata. The second thing was there is a bias to action. So the time for talk for us is long gone for our whānau here in South Auckland. We need to be doing stuff together now. We can't afford to wait for the next best policy or the next best intervention. We want to be doing stuff with our community, with our whānau right now, figuring out what's possible. And so there's a bias to action in the stuff. You're testing stuff, learning with whānau, and so that made sense to me. And the other thing is this thing helps us to learn through rapid cycles of learning and iterations and figure out quickly what's not going to work so that we can figure out what is going to work. So the stuff around fast fail and understanding, quickly understanding what the potential is. The tikanga approach made sense to me because yeah, the methodology seems sound, but it needs to be contextualised. It needs to be appropriate for our communities. Our whānau need to see themselves reflected in anything we do, any work, any process, any space. And so we started to think about what needs to sit with the methodology in terms of practice. And for me, that was our mātauranga Māori. So we've created a tikanga framework that's derived primarily from Māori, a kaupapa Māori research methodology, and we use that framework as the lens for how we are supporting our whānau inside of the process and the conditions that need to be present so that whānau feel welcomed, safe, reflected, empowered inside of the process. So we use whanaungatanga, rangatiratanga, mana, ako, and manaakitanga. Did I get them all? We're reviewing that. We're not saying those are the only tikanga that you would use on in that. There was a comment on Facebook around wairua. We think that's critical too, and also we're thinking about Māori in the space. But that framework sits, provides us, it's the guidance for the way that we are working with whānau. And we can give you some practical examples of that. And it sits at the heart for me of this practice. It would sit at the heart of any practice for me, whether it was design, whether it was collective impact, whether it was anything else. This is the thing, it kind of sits at the heart. And the second thing that, the third thing that we've been thinking about is the neuroscience that's coming out of the Centre of the Developing Child in Harvard around the criticality of the first 1,000 days of our babies' lives, building the brain architecture that needs to be built in the first 1,000 days and what that means for lifelong outcomes. But one of the more critical things for me in terms of that science is it talks about how you build the capability of the whānau or the adults in their life so they can nurture their children. So that's around reducing stress, helping increase bandwidth, cognitive bandwidth for whānau, and thinking about executive function when you're engaging with adults. All that means is that when you are living in the type of complexity that many of our whānau live in here in South Auckland and across the Motu, then we've got to fundamentally rethink the way we are responding and supporting them inside of these processes. Because a lot of the things we're doing now is compounding the stress that they're experiencing. So how do we fundamentally rethink that? That's probably enough.
So just to reiterate Angie's point that we just really want to share with everybody where we're at and what we're learning, and we're really interested to understand how what we're seeing connects to what others are doing, and really recognise that there's lots of mahi in this space. So this is our offer just to share where we're up to, not the answers. I'm just going to jump back on. We've never done a webinar before either, so you can tell we're a bit awkward with the jumping back and forth, but just see if we can work it out.
You're fine. Whilst you're figuring it out, Ihoi, just checking in, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the development of TSI over the years, and also the design processes, it's been a good decade now of embedding systems and processes, and I think the transformative impact of the approach is that, as you said before, Angie, this isn't just about a program, a programmatic approach. or a policy approach. It's a fully integrated approach, which is about you have to bring all the partners around the table, from government, from the whānau, from those that will be engaging and connecting with whānau on a regular basis. So the actual approach is very holistic, and I know that gets bandied around a lot, but the fact that TSI have been very brave and courageous and breaking ground has actually meant, and I'm certain you'll cover it, has actually meant that you've been able to drive some quite significant social change and behaviour change as a result of this approach, which I'm certain you'll cover.
So just, I guess, in a minute, Angie is going to kind of deep dive into more aspects of the mahi and what she's been working with whānau, but to sort of just cap this piece about almost the methodology, because we really recognise the issues that you're raising in the introduction, Kay-Marie, around the use of the term co-design and its problematic implementation in a way that really is probably the opposite of some of the intent, and that's very, very real, I guess, for us to engage with that and be really critical about what we mean by it. But where we're coming from really is the practice that we're trying to, I guess, identify, develop, and in some ways promote, I guess, is very much values-led and relationally driven, as opposed to methods first. So whatever serves the purpose is kind of what we're interested in. So to some extent, the conversation about language is really important, and other times we get really tangled up in terms, and really we're interested in what does it mean to start with values, to start with the outcomes that matter with whānau, and then for whānau, and putting around whatever we need to try and make that happen. But a way to, I guess, simply describe some of the key things for us around co-design, and this is my language, it's probably not how Angie would explain it necessarily, but a way of just highlighting some of the shifts for us, just on this slide, if I can get it to work, is for us, it's not so much co-design as a way to design a service or a thing. It's much more about approaches to well-being that are locally responsive, they're strengths-based, they're community-led, and they think about systems conditions. So we're interested in how co-design serves that kind of purpose, not a new program designed better, because otherwise we end up just reinforcing the broader structural issues, the ongoing impacts of colonisation, the structural racism that sits inside the system. We're not addressing any of that by just tweaking program by program. And I'm not saying that there's not improvements to be made programmatically, but we're trying to see it really as a bigger way of having a community level response that's backed up by a policy response. That's a big ask, we're not there yet, but that's the framing. And then secondly, not so much co-design for a new idea. So not so much let's crack out this silver bullet, this one thing that's going to solve all these complex problems. Really backing away from that. I know that we particularly as government are always reaching for that simple answer. That's not what we're engaging in. We're up for a much deeper conversation than that, around building capability, building capacity, reconfiguring how the system has set up resources and funding and assets. So it's a kind of shift away from, yes, I'm seeing someone ask about the slides, absolutely. But just so that's the space we're kind of wanting to talk about the role of co-design in, rather than we're going to work together and make a great new thing. Great new stuff comes out of it for sure, but it's more about what's enabled relationship building, the deconstruction of current funding structures, or those kinds of things that come from working together differently. So I just wanted to provide, it's not perfect, but it just helps to position a little bit where we're coming from.
So the thing about this, whatever you call it, whether you call it an innovation methodology, you call it whānau-centred design, or it's something else, the whole purpose of it for me and for the team is how do we empower our whānau and our communities to lead the design, implementation and learning of local fit-for-purpose solutions for them. So it's about, and for our most complex issues as well, because a lot of the time we think only these massive institutions are going to be able to solve some of these the most complex issues we've got. And actually what we're learning is there's so much potential in terms of innovation capacity, capability, resourcefulness, resilience in our communities. All we've got to do is support that for them to create their own solutions. And so this is kind of what this is geared to do. So it's whatever it takes to do that for us. So that we're sharing the shift of power now becomes how we're supporting whānau and community to do what they need to do, rather than how are we creating something that's going to meet a deficit target. What are we talking about next?
That's a good segue. Angie's now going to talk about what that looks like.
Great segue to some stuff that we're doing. So you would have just heard Penny talking about, you know, we're trying to figure out, you know, it's not about it. Well, it is about what can we do better in terms of services, but also what else can we do to respond and support whānau in a different way, in a fundamentally different way. And what we've been thinking about is, and we'll just use 2 examples here, is how do we realise the potential of spaces and existing resource inside of community to respond to whānau in a different way. And secondly, that the second thing I'll talk about is also how do we, what would need to happen for us to develop whānau to whānau responses. And I know there are many examples of those already in Aotearoa, but we're trying to figure out what that looks like for us here in South Auckland. So if I just start with some work that we were doing with Plunkett, for example, in Manurewa, which was initially premised on a refurb of a space, but we saw it as really an opportunity to think about systems readiness or systems change in locality. So what could we do with Plunkett right now in this physical space that would support a capability build inside of Plunkett in a different way of working with whānau? Not to say they're not doing great stuff with whānau already, but what else could we do to support whānau? And what that's led us to think about is, how do you create the conditions in terms of spaces to start to share power and control with whānau in the space, but also to be able to respond to what the needs and aspirations are, particularly of the whānau in that space. And so what that means for us is we've been, and our whānau have told us in some kōrero here in South Auckland, that they're often parenting outside of their home. So they've got little babies or little fellas, and often they're outside of their home for lots of reasons. They might be lonely, it might be cold, someone might be asleep, might not be safe. And so we were like, well, here's this massive opportunity for us to create spaces where whānau feel like they're welcome, they can nurture their tamariki. And so we started to think about how we did that across a network of spaces, and particularly in Manurewa. And we supported our whānau to lead that conversation. And so the first thing they were telling us was what they needed physically in the space to be there. So if I want a parent in a space, here's the things that I need. We call those the 5 minimums. Shall I go into detail about this? How much detail? They needed 5 things in the space. To cut a long story short, I'll just say them quickly so people can understand what I'm talking about. A place to change the baby and clean the baby. A place to warm up food, kitchen facilities. A place to connect with others if they wanted to or not. Just be around people. Warm and welcoming staff. And a place to put baby down and have a little rest. They told us that those were the 5 things. We started to think about those as almost a criteria about how whānau friendly are these spaces that we have. Because what Plunkett was saying to us was, we keep inviting whānau down, but they don't come down. And other spaces were saying the same thing. And so we used this as a bit of a checklist. And for the Manurewa site, the Plunkett site only had 1 of the 5. And they didn't have a change table in a Plunkett site. And there's lots of reasons why the site had developed like that, in terms of the pressure that Plunkett's under to deliver what they need to deliver and the way that it's delivered. But it's a really interesting insight around us challenging whether you are actually whānau centred in terms of your behaviour in your space. just delivering a service to whānau and to children does not make you tamariki or whānau centred. And that's not a criticism, those are the conditions the system are putting on our organisations to deliver certain things. And then the second thing was, not only did the space need to be physically fit for purpose, but the offering in the space needed to be specific and unique to what that community needed. So this is the idea of thinking about, there are spaces where services and programs are delivered into or out of, to spaces where whānau actually have shared power and control into the space to say what they need. An example of that was, for example, at Plunkett, they were delivering their tamariki wellbeing, their well child services. They were also doing car seat clinics. They were doing specific whānau centre support for mums and babies around breastfeeding, and they were all great. And what whānau are telling us is they just often need a safe space to come down and connect without judgment, to be supported. So it's figuring out, how do you do the stuff we need to do, but also how do you open up the space for whānau to feel welcome. So there's something in the physical offerings of the space and what the minimum is there, but also about how we're sharing power and control in the spaces for whānau to be able to determine what the offering in the space is. And often it's not service or program, it's things around connecting with people like myself, being able to have a conversation with someone who might understand the challenges of my whānau, but not necessarily wanting it to be a professional or a service. A place to be healed, not just physically, wider. Those are the kinds of things whānau are telling us are important. So that's the kind of example. So the outcome of that was, quite proud of this, they've got a change table at the site. The site now is more physically fit for purpose. It's bright and colourful. It's got all the stuff whānau said they needed in terms of the aesthetics of the place. But the most important thing is, the team and inside the Plunkett Centre have set their own kawa, which puts whānau at the centre of everything that they do. Now there's a kawa for the space. It's not about delivering the service. Well, it is about delivering the service well, but it's about putting this values-led approach to the way that whānau are welcomed into the space. Firstly, not seeing whānau come through the door and going, are you here for well child, or are you here for? It's about welcoming them into the space, and that has been a really big learning for us about how you support the team and the culture. Basically, I'll touch on this more. This is about the social change stuff, but that was our other big learning. You can do stuff physically in the spaces, and that needs to happen. Whānau need to be involved, but what underpins that is the culture of that organisation, that team, mindsets, attitudes towards whānau. So that was that one. The second thing we're thinking about, I'll try and do this quickly, is we've been able to do some work in a couple of projects where whānau have led a peer-to-peer or a whānau to whānau response. And one of those projects was with the Ko Tuitui Trust, who are doing some amazing work, and really that work was about whānau saying that the things that they were concerned about, they wanted to address as a whānau in their community, was poor housing conditions and safety. And what we talked to the whānau about there is, what did they think their greatest strengths were? And they talked about aroha ki te tangata, manaakitanga ki te tangata. I want to care for other people in my community. Sometimes that feels hard to do because of the realities of our world now. And so we thought about how we help whānau create warmer, drier, healthier homes. And instead of putting rheumatic fever, poor housing conditions, skin infections at the centre of what we did, we put what the whānau were telling us was their greatest strength, iterated a prototype based on the strength, created a prototype called Kohuia Mano, which the outcome of that was whanaungatanga first, connecting with other whānau, supporting other whānau, connecting each other in place. And also they thought about how they democratise some highly technical information around housing functionality So they created a prototype where they came together, connected with each other as a whānau, created these new networks of relationships at a local level, and they also created a prototype where they would go in as whānau and help other whānau do some low cost, no cost things inside of their home, use the knowledge that they just shared with whānau over a cup of tea, alongside some pragmatic solutions using bubble wrap, vinegar. The result is that that response was faster and more effective than the system's response. And when I talk about that, I mean some of these whānau had registered for housing programs, and they'd waited up to 5 months for someone to come and do the assessment and for the program to happen. This thing can happen in 2 weeks, can do the same thing, and the potential that we understand it has is there can be a significant increase in the heat and the dryness inside of the home from this intervention. So from a program perspective, if you wanted to call it, we know it's good. And also what we observed in this process is that when you are building people's capability through a design process and they are engaging with other whānau, you start to see a whole heap of other social outcomes that are critical. Things like building people's social capital. They're involved in things in their community they may not have been before. They become board of trustee members. At the school, they were too shy to go inside the gates before that. They become Māori wardens. They take up part-time work, which they might not have been confident to do. So when you start to build people's self-efficacy, their agency, their confidence through this type of process, where they're leading it and they're being told, you can do this stuff, you're incredibly talented, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then you are creating at the same time, hopefully positive pro-social connections that they might not have had in their community. They've been quite socially isolated. So you're creating all of these other social outcomes in the way that you're working with people, as well as the prototype itself. But what we're interested in is a transfer of knowledge that allows our communities to be able to do this stuff for themselves. And so there's some talk around who does co-design and where that sits. And people think about that as often a consultancy, or we're getting consultants to do that. What we're saying is what we know, we are sharing with our whānau, and that's part of the capacity and capability build as we do it. And we're learning lots at the same time, but our interest is in whānau and communities being able to have the skill, the capability, the capacity to create their own local purpose solutions, I guess.
There's a couple of questions coming up about did we support the implementation of the change, and we've been lucky enough, or Angie has, to be able to stay connected to this. So we're not just doing anything at the upfront. That's not the way this work is manifesting. So it's about seeing the change happen. We're still connected to that group and community in an ongoing way. So it's an ongoing building in of capability and revisiting and coming back, but also working alongside the providers and government teams that sort of hold the key to some of those resources, and working with them to understand what does it mean to reconfigure their resources. And Angie's going to talk about that in a minute, because there's a lot more to it, right, than just saying, oh, we should do it this way. But just to reiterate that, I guess where the energy is for us is there's lots of services that do incredibly good work, and we're not saying no, there shouldn't be services, but we are recognising, along with lots of others, that often the way we've packaged up the resource through a service, it's actually doing more harm for people. We contribute through the delivery of some of our social services to the increase in stress for people. We make people work much, much harder than they need to, and for lots of people that's not serving them. So what does it look like to move beyond services and see the capability that already exists in community, and then reconfigure those important assets and knowledge in ways that's complementary and reciprocal, rather than holding that expert-led model, which we have. And I know the government likes to talk about, all governments like to talk about evidence-based programming, and that's a red flag, right? Because whose evidence, from what program, from what other country, and where was that, and in what context was that delivered? Who says that that thing is going to come and serve our community? So we're trying to unpack and challenge some of those ideas about what good looks like and where it comes from, and say there's so much more know-how and knowledge in the system. We've got all these resources already here, but the way we've got them packaged up at the moment is tightly around funded services and what, you know, responses on single things, and that doesn't seem to be serving us. So what does it mean to reconfigure some of that stuff? And Angie's going to talk now about how we can say that. It's really easy to say that, but then what does it take for us as practitioners, service providers, government teams to really genuinely engage with that? Someone else asked about links to the examples, and we can put up links to the things that we're sharing.
Can I just also, there were also a couple of really good questions raised around how does co-design impact or interact with collective impact. You know, you've got the jargon words kind of knocking into each other. Can you just answer that question for us, please, Penny?
Oh, I mean, I think they're all talking about working more collaboratively. To some extent, I mean, it depends how you implement these things, right? It depends what your version is. I think if collective impact's working for people, then do that and mash everything up if you like. One of the emphasis for collective impact, as I understand it, is that there tends to be a lot of work around measures, the alignment of measures, and a lot of work around building the collaboration structures before you get into a project. And I get that, because there's a whole thing about building trust and things, but also what we've found most useful is you have to start trying to change things, genuinely understand what it will take to change things. And so if we spend a lot of time trying to set up the structures for collaboration, and there's a balance here, then we can, you know, we're better off to get in and start actually testing where is there barriers and obstacles. But I wouldn't put them against each other. I think whatever works, and there's lots of overlap, and I think
that's trying to figure out what's the purpose for our communities in our whānau now, and there could be elements of collective impact. What I would say about that though, and I've only been involved on the fringes of one process that we would call collective impact, is that it feels often it's agency led, and people could be doing that practicing in a different way now, and that could be community and whānau led, but it often feels like it's agencies coming together first and kind of figuring something out, and we're trying to figure out how you help this thing to be whānau led and community led, and the rest of us fall in behind that and figure out what that means, the change that we need to make for that to happen. Just one thing around the whānau to whānau and the reconfiguring, like we totally haven't worked everything out. So one of the big challenges for me is if we are supporting whānau to whānau, then how are we resourcing the whānau? Because we can't be expecting our communities and our whānau to be doing this work for nothing, because they often get quite passionate about the work, they want to lead it, but they need a decent income for their families. And so we're still figuring out what that model looks like, how you reconfigure resource for whānau to be able to do this work, and work out the challenges around abatements, around income, the tax stuff and all of that stuff, because we don't want to be putting people in a more difficult situation, but we don't want people to be doing this stuff for free, because essentially they're picking up the slack on some stuff that's not working, that the system isn't able to respond to. So that's so we're trying to figure that out. We don't know what that looks like, but we're not exactly.
I thought because there was another question that was raised about te tiriti and co-governance, so perhaps for this segment, Angie, maybe you might want to bring a bit of a treaty lens on it, because I think it lends itself as well to that specific statement you've made around resourcing, and especially about power imbalance, because when organisations or agencies are sending people in to do this work, they are employed full-time, and we're taking from community often their knowledge, their experience, their time, their energy, and so maybe bring a little bit of a treaty lens to your analysis too could be helpful in answering that question and keeping the flow going too.
Well, I can only do my best, but when I think about rangatiratanga, now I can sometimes get into trouble with some people around this term, but I'm saying that's autonomy for our whānau where they're living right now. So we are a number of urban Māori living outside of Aotearoa, most of us here in South Auckland. So we recognise the role of mana whenua, the status of mana whenua here, and of their kaitiaki of the whenua and the people here. And I also want to understand, what does it mean to support rangatiratanga for whānau who are living outside of their iwi rohe. And when I say that, I simply mean their ability, their autonomy to actively decide and participate in their own destiny, whatever that is, their outcome. So that is something that we've been thinking about as well. We've also been in discussions with iwi and with other kaupapa Māori organisations around what does it mean to reconfigure resource to this area where you've got a number of your own iwi living here, and government departments are seeking to support Māori outcomes. What does that mean for us at a regional level, I guess, or at a locality level? So that's something we've been thinking about. But I'll just, Penny's already kind of talked about it, but I'm introed it. But what we're going to talk about now is what are some of the challenges around doing this work, and particularly we're thinking about how do we support the conditions and the capabilities for this type of work, innovation work in system. And what we know about this work is that when we're working with systems or large organisations, and we're using or we're working with whānau on a particular project or piece of work, and we're getting the key stakeholders around the table to support us in that work, or the organisation, is when we're asking people to do things differently, to rethink the way they share power and control with whānau, then that push for systems and people in systems to think outside of their expert-led model, their embedded practice, often conditions that are preventing innovation bubble to the surface. So what we've found, and I wasn't expecting to find this, was that you often surface embedded issues in the system or in the culture that organisation or the system has not been able to acknowledge and resolve for itself. And so when we're going in and talking to people about spaces and how you share power and control with spaces, actually, as we help people to understand how they might do that, things like institutional racism or racist attitudes and mindsets in terms of individuals bubble to the surface, and other things come to the surface that are sort of sitting inside that system and preventing them from responding in a different way or supporting whānau in a different way. And we did not expect that, but it seems to really rattle the cage for some of our more traditional systems and people inside of systems. And so what we've had to figure out is, well, what does that mean for us? Because when we leaned in and was doing some work with a large system, and institutional racism and mindsets came to the forefront of the work, we were like, well, this is a management issue. This is not innovation work. This should have been sorted out by the organisation. But actually, what we have come to realise is that when you're in the work doing this work, everything's up. You've got to be open to everything. And what it's meant for us is that we've had to think about how we access the right expertise and skill. Because usually what would happen is when these things are surfaced or emerge, people say it's too hard, we're going to walk away, and it never gets addressed. And we're saying, actually, the culture and the conditions for readiness, for innovation, responsiveness to our whānau, what that means is when we're in that work, we need to figure out how we address some of the things that the system itself hasn't been able to in a safe way for the people in the system, for our whānau, for ourselves. And so what that's meant is we've started to think about the practice in terms of working alongside people in the system. And you can see a little visual here. And what we know is working practically when we're working with organisations and systems is that firstly we need to be modelling the types of behaviour that we're asking people to demonstrate themselves. And sometimes inside of the system that's hard because there's no manaki for them. So, and that's the other key. So if we have to have empathy for people who are in the system as much as we do for people that we're seeking to serve inside of our community, our whānau. And often that is hard for them. So you can't be rocking up and saying, you need to manaaki whānau in this way. You need to be supporting the rangatiratanga in this way, when they don't feel like they have the conditions themselves inside the system or the service where they feel that they are being nurtured and cared for. So that's a big challenge for us. The other thing we've been thinking about is what we're calling agile partnering. And it's kind of like what I was talking about when you're in the work, everything's in scope. Well, when you're in a partnership, you leverage everything for what that partner's telling you they need. And often it's not what you're bringing to the table. So you might have some resource, they might not want that resource. They might want something else. And when you're truly in an innovation partnership, inside of the system, you leverage every relationship, every resource, everything you've got to meet their needs in terms of what they're telling you they need, not what you can bring. So you're open to whatever needs to be done, and you're open to whatever needs to be accessed for them. And then the third one is sometimes you're going to have to hit on some quite painful pressure points, because those are the conditions that are preventing systems and people and teams and the culture in the organisation from being innovative or responsive ready. And so part of it is you going into the process knowing sometimes you're going to have some quite courageous conversations, and you're going to have to be quite brave in terms of the kōrero you're having with either your partner organisation or with the system. Yeah. And so those kind of principles that sit with that for us are how are we sharing power and control with our whānau and our communities, but also with the organisations that we are working with. I can speak in terms of Auckland Council. We've got some traditional behaviours that don't reflect that. And so we are learning how to do that well ourselves, or we're trying to do it. We're doing it well, but we're trying to do it better. And also sharing risk. Because we can't be out there asking people to do things differently and not alleviating or mitigating any of the risk that means for our NGOs, for our community groups, for our whānau. Because what tends to happen is those people with the most power and control are devolving the risk down the line. So all of the risk is now sitting with those that have the closest proximity to our whānau. So now our NGOs have all of the risk around engaging with whānau and trying to support them. And we're saying that is not conducive to innovation, capability and development and responsiveness. We're going to have to find out a way to redistribute that risk back. What that means in terms of our behaviour is we often take on some of the risk ourselves by saying, we'll take the hit for that. If this sort of goes to CASA, we'll take the responsibility for that. And the third one is kind of talking about how do you share the load for this work? Because what emerges and surfaces in this work is a whole heap of stuff you are likely to not have expected. And so how do you find allies, resources, reconfigure resources so that you can meet the need of what the work is asking, what the work is telling you the need is in the work.
I'm conscious that we've only got a few minutes. Should I just try and jump on the last couple of points, Tangaere, or do you want to? Yeah. We've sort of been moving in and out of questions and stuff.
Yeah, it's all good. I think there's a whole stack of questions that have come up as well. So I think let's bring your key points up, and then let's go through each of the pātai one by one, because people are very interested in what you've had to share.
Kia ora. So just the last bit here, and us looking at what's holding the status quo in place, right? Like what's keeping us repeating the same challenges, even when we know that they're not getting us where we want to go. And one of the key things that's come up for us is the way that data and outcomes and measures are used. So what are we tracking, and who decided those were the important things? Whose perspective and values do they reflect? How were whānau involved in identifying success criteria? Did they even have a voice in that? And what the gap is when you actually work with whānau and look at what outcomes matter and make the difference to them. Like to Angie's example before, it was more about whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, feeling connected, feeling belong, having control, having space, being able to heal. Those were the important outcomes, not did you get X service delivered? And so that we've got this gap between the things we're tracking a lot of the time and the things that are making the difference for people. And this, I know this isn't news for people, but we've tried to start unpacking it along with others I know who are working in this space. And we know that there are providers who really do go work really deeply with whānau and identify those outcomes, but often they're not what they're required to then report back into the internal sort of procurement and commissioning spaces. And so we're just playing with trying to surface this idea of what's this gap between our wellbeing aspirations at a high level, these big indicators of wellbeing that sound pretty good, but actually what we're manifesting on the front line in our services for libraries, for example, you know, where we might be tracking things around books or programs, but are we tracking how effective are they as healing spaces or connecting spaces? And what would it mean if we started to shape the way we were developing our wellbeing responses against these different kinds of outcomes? Because maybe our obsession with data and collection and reporting is actually not just not serving us, but at times it's getting in the way of these wellbeing aspirations that we're developing as a country, as well as for whānau. And so one of the things we're doing is experimenting, and I say there's others in this space, and we're really excited to connect with people about their learning with the local indicators for change and how they might look different to how we might have been tracking traditionally at a service level, and what does that mean. So I've just put some up here on the left, the kinds of things we hear from whānau that are indicators that things are working for them. And on the right, the things that we're hearing from providers when they've been able to move into the space, for example, our systems partners. And just saying, if we were aiming towards these kinds of things, how might that shift how we were thinking? And so we've also been just playing with teams. We're figuring out how to start some of these conversations. This is it's a prototype of a tool just to help teams think about, oh, well, what are we reporting up? What are we delivering in our data collection, and how connected is that to the things that we care about? Who's been involved in the development of success criteria? What lenses were placed on those? So whose value system decided what success looked like? Where did we draw on the evidence? Was it just Western science? Was there a mātauranga lens or place for this? Were whānau involved? And just trying to surface, because what's happened when we talk with people is that the data collection stuff's often disconnected from the mahi, as if it wasn't actually part of how we're creating wellbeing for people. So that's become a significant area for us that we're working in. And then our very last one is just
about the measure. The measure thing's real challenging. Penny's done some pretty amazing thinking and created a pretty awesome framework for us to learn, which we're calling Niho Taniwha. But one thing that's sticking out for me, well, there's two things. Data sovereignty. So whānau are those stop becoming the consumers of this data and become the producers, the owners, and the users of the data for themselves, and what do they think is important to them and how do they use that data. But the other thing is, when we talk about measures, tikanga, they are the measures. So if you are creating the conditions for people to come in, if you are creating the conditions for whanaungatanga where people can connect to each other, create genuine, authentic relationships, then the outcome is whanaungatanga too. So you can see when people say, I know I've got positive relationships in my community now. And that's what I think is an interesting concept for us to think about, the tikanga, in terms of they're telling you they are the mechanism for the outcome, they're not on either end of the I just want to say that now. What are we up to? The last slide.
Yeah, this was our sort of some of the things that we're like grappling with slides. So I can either talk through them or just leave them there and hand back to you, Kay Marie.
Well, kapai, hey, kia ora tātou. We've got a minute left. And so I know that there have been a lot of questions that have come up, some really interesting ones around systems thinking and how can people develop systems for participation. What happens when systems push back, especially from those that believe that they're already doing it well. So kia ora Danielle, that was a really good question. and also some great questions on Facebook around co-design and whānanga, which have been, there's a question there around, has co-design really a Western way of reframing whānanga in the way that we've been doing things for eons, and therefore how might we also look at different frameworks or different approaches or kaupapa Māori centred approaches that incorporate tikanga Māori, and I like this term tikanga a wairua, so that was really nice as well. And so what I'd like to suggest is, whānau, if you want to stay connected with Angie and Penny, why don't we kind of move the conversation across to the Facebook group. I'd love to invite our two speakers today to respond to some of those questions as best as you can, and just realise, whānau, one great thing about these two wahine is their humility. They're already saying, look, we're not the overall experts, they've just had the opportunity to be able to practice in community. So also, the encouragement here for you is to continue to develop your own thinking and your own research as well. And we're going to share the slides afterwards as well for everybody so that you can stay connected. But yeah, if you can, everyone come across to the Facebook group, and we'll get the lovely ladies to share their insights there with you directly. Awesome. Ka pai. Oh, kia ora tātou, e hoa mā. Thank you so much for coming in this today. Thank you, ladies, for sharing your insights. I mean, there's so much to share. Perhaps we can look at running a follow-up hui so that you can actually go a bit more of a deep dive, especially if we don't get to all the amazing questions that have been raised today. To each of you that have joined us today, thank you for taking time out of your days to do this mahi with us. Again, come across to our Facebook page, sign up to our newsletter via email, and also just take time to hang out with us on a more regular basis. And just quickly, our next kōrero will be with Dr. Juan Todi, who's known as the Māori criminologist, and he's going to be giving some really, really interesting perspectives on crime, and also some of the factors that contribute to criminal behaviour, and also some of the ways that communities may be able to heal from that as well. Ka pai. So thank you all very much. Take care. Ladies, I'll keep you on the call. All the best. Mauri ora tātou katoa.
Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
The Community Research website offers a hub for good community research and researchers. It's the place for the public to find and share evidence about effective community practices. The website collects research and evidence and organises these so that they can be easily accessed and used by other groups. You can access this research and browse by category, by a list of quick-link topics, or by searching for something specific. All of the research is free to download. The Community Research site is all about excellence and effective practices. You can view recordings of past webinars and find out about future ones. The webinars share evidence about what's working in the community sector. Published by Community Research in 2007, the Code of Practice provides the standards and guidelines for doing research. It's the place to start if you're thinking of undertaking research with or in a community or iwi. As well as the collection of research, we keep a register of experienced researchers who are skilled at working with iwi and communities. To find a researcher who can help you, we have a filter system which allows you to find people based on location, qualification, ethnic group, and area of expertise. The Community Research website is a unique resource for the community sector to use and share. It matters because communities who learn well will do well. It matters because it evidences what's working for us. For researchers and community people alike, we've made it as easy as possible to share your research on our website. Kaua e whakamā. Uploading material is quick and simple. Save your work as a PDF and head over to Share Research. Answer a few questions that help us tag and organise the research so it's easy for people to find. If you're a researcher and skilled at working with communities, you can add your details to the directory of researchers so that you can be found. Community research keeps you updated and informed. This helps make you more effective. If you want to stay updated about the latest research, informed about new resources and our upcoming webinars, head over to sign up for our e-news on the homepage. Community research is a rich resource built for and by the community. For it to reach maximum potential, we rely on you to contribute, participate and support the resource to grow and thrive. Mā te kotahitanga e ora ai tātou.